So let's start with the masterclass. The topic is something that's quite close to my heart. That is the concept of decentralization. I am working at the Nova University. I am a researcher and a professor there on the area of digital platforms. And the concept of decentralization is something that touches all of us, but sometimes we don't give it enough focus. And through this course, we are going to cover topics which include the cryptocurrencies, which include blockchain, which includes many different technologies, but within the context of decentralization, which is a very multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary approach to the topic itself. So let's get rolling here. Now, to explain you in a very simple way, what is centralization and what is decentralization, we can think of it in many different levels. But if you see in this picture, both left and right, they represent nature. They represent nature in a way that there are flowers and plants. However, the one on the left is a jungle. It's raw, it's natural, it has this natural beauty in itself. But the most interesting thing is that there is no one person, one individual, or if you want to call the hand of God, maybe that's there, but there's no individual who designed it. There's no person who designed it. It seems sort of pseudo random. It seems as if every cell in the plants, in the trees, in the algae, in the water, they all have a natural intelligence and they create this ecosystem where there is competitive and symbiotic relationships that allow this jungle, this beautiful jungle, to emerge. While on the right side, we see a highly well-groomed garden. There's a gardener who's designed it, and he's designed where exactly the yellow flowers should lie, and both are very beautiful. But the problem is on the right side that if the gardener goes away on a vacation, it's going to all get destroyed. But the one on the left has this kind of a resilience that allows it to stay always in place. And if we look at this very simple conceptual understanding of what is a centralized system versus what is a decentralized system, we can find parallels in all of human society. So we can apply this concept to a company, to an organization, to a government, to a social system, to a digital platform. And that's what we are going to explore throughout this course. So let's think of it in general. What are the characteristics of a centralized system? A centralized system is efficient because you have someone at the center deciding on who should do what. There is a central command center, which is very characteristic of a centralized system. And all of the company structures that we are today aware of are basically essentially very centralized. You have the CEO, then you have a hierarchical pyramid structure, you have a clear chain of command, and it works well. It works well in most cases, excepting when we are faced with concepts, especially when we are faced with things like disruptive innovation. We often have this problem that a highly very large pyramidal organization sometimes is very slow to adapt to change. But let's again look at what are the other aspects. There are clear goals and objectives because, of course, it's very centralized, which makes which makes the management and control very quick, which is its advantage. And that's why we see a lot more centralized organizations today than decentralized. And there is a clear hierarchy and there is a concentration of power. Now, a decentralized system is like the mirror image of that. There is a bottom-up decision making. There is no one central command center. There is a lot of freedom to test and fail because there is a lot of testing that's happening. There is a lot of innovation that can emerge from the fringes. The goals and strategies are quite dynamic. Flat organization, it's a term being used by certain organizations like, for example, Google and so on. They have tried to decentralize the centralized structure a bit by giving more autonomy to the lower edges of the organization, and there are distributed power structures. So essentially, when I talk about decentralized and centralized, you see the slider here. I put this slider because I wanted to emphasize that it's not about whether organization is centralized or decentralized. There are levels of decentralization that can be calibrated, and neither can you say that one is more efficient than the other. In certain cases, a centralized system might be very efficient, especially when you want to launch it quickly. A decentralized system is like an ecosystem, it's like a natural ecosystem, which means it has to emerge. Different players have to come through. So, a decentralized ecosystem can be more resilient, but only after it has attained that critical mass of sustainability. Let's look at and apply this concept to different areas of our society and life. So we know a centralized system is like a dictatorship. It's very clear. The chain of command is there, and the systems work till they don't. And but a decentralized system is more, you can say, democracy compared to a dictatorial system is a more decentralized ecosystem because the power is divulged and there is a manner in which the society can choose to change the political leadership. Now, any decentralized system tends to mimic nature than it tends to mimic man-made structures. So nature has two types of tendencies through which evolution happens. One is these competitive evolution, and other is collaborative evolution. So competition means that everyone tries different solutions, and what fails gets rejected. And that's how, over time, a better solution comes in. And collaborative is symbiotic relationships that we see in nature, where organisms help each other in order to grow. Now, in the case of democracy, of course, because we have this ability to throw a leader, which means there is an element of natural selection, which theoretically should allow a democracy to evolve, but we know it doesn't happen all the time, that most democracies are not perfect. They are far from perfect. Certain dictatorships can work very well for quite a long period of time. So that's in that sphere. Now let's look at it in another aspect of economic systems. Now, one of the best examples in our human society of a decentralized system is free market economy. A free market economy allows for different participants in the economy to signal to each other about what products, goods, and services to produce because others want to consume them. And this signaling mechanism often is dependent on money, because money basically is a way which flows from people who have needs for goods, and from basically consumers to producers. And money is a signaling system that allows a decentralized growth of a market to happen, because there is no one individual telling whom to grow what. But that has been tried. That has been tried in USSR, in the whole communism period of communism, that the state knows better. The big state, will tell the farmer to produce, which farmer should produce potatoes and which farmer should produce how much of potatoes. And we saw what happens, because the central state in a centralized system sometimes does not have the full information, even with the best intention in mind, leave alone when there is corruption in the system. And that's why over a long period of time, decentralized systems can be so much more resilient. And this is why we ask this question, that can this concept of decentralization be applied in our technological systems, in our social systems? Because technological innovation is expanding very rapidly. You see this picture of birds in a decentralized manner for having a formation and flying. They don't hit with each other. There is a sort of a collective intelligence over here. Now, now this is again an example of how a decentralized ecosystem could work. But for them to work, there needs to be a free flow of information. There needs to be an open access so participants can join and leave. And this free flow of information could be money, could be information technology, could be something that is known as swarm intelligence in the case of technologies. It should have these evolutionary mechanisms that reward success and punish failures. Otherwise, you would have the same problems which we have in centralized systems, that often the center, since the failures are not often punished, which a market economy tends to punish, you do not have this improvements happening. But at the same time, there needs to be some sort of a collaborative mechanism. And most of all, there needs to be a shared value amongst the participants. Because if the participants don't have a shared value, whether it's a social group or a society or a technological or a technology consisting of various robots, even they need to have a common goal and a shared value that is humanly programmed by humans in that case. So moving ahead, let's look at which are the technologies over the past 20 years that have revolutionized human society. And if there was one technology that I was uh, to to speak about, and that would be the internet. And the internet emerged in layers. It emerged over various protocols, and it allowed interconnection of nodes across the world. And that was its beauty, because the core architecture of the internet was decentralized. It was based on any node can join and transmit messages to each other. And it took a long time for people to actually realize that the internet could have economic value. In fact, in 1998, the Nobel Prize winning economist Paul Krugman had this very infamous statement that the value of the internet would not be anything more than a fax machine, because the internet was basically just another way of sending a message. We could not envision at that time that a decentralized system like the internet would allow innovation to take place in fringes. There would be many companies who would be open to experiment new forms of business models, and most would fail, and a few would succeed. And those are the Amazons and the Googles and the Apples of today. The very few, five or six big tech companies have sort of monopolized the internet, but they emerged out of this process of natural selection. But the internet, although, as I mentioned, led to the emergence of a few big companies, and that's another aspect that we are going to explore. That how internet, it was meant to be decentralized, but it began to get centralized because all of these companies emerged and they gained that critical mass. The internet has always been the era that allowed always been the technology which allowed for exploration into decentralized uh, forms of functioning. And the first ones were the open source software movement. So there was this movement that was always there amongst the programming community, that we don't want everything only to be proprietary. There needs to be open collaborative systems. And software developers contributed with their time free of cost in the distributed or decentralized way to create many open source software, which actually are the foundations of a lot of technologies used in the web today, whether it's PHP, whether it's the Linux, whether it's MySQL, which basically powers most of the web servers today. So but the problem with this open source movement was that there was no way to create value for the contributors. Everything was based on a donation basis, which means you couldn't yet create a proper organization where you could actually deliver value to the contributors. And 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 then we will explore what change is happening over there. But another aspect that happened with all these big tech coming in, with such as Uber and Facebook, I call them centralized systems, and I call them centralized softwares because they are owned by one company, one individual. But the very reason they became so successful is that they came and brought about decentralization in society. For instance, let's look at what was happening before Uber was actually here in our society. The licenses for taxis were issued by municipalities on a very limited basis. There was no real way to determine how many licenses actually should be. Sometimes there were shortages, which meant that when you needed a taxi, you couldn't have it on demand. And even calling a taxi was a very centralized process. You didn't have these AI and machine learning technologies that allow for the Uber-like decentralized way of connecting drivers and passengers. So all of these technologies, all of these platforms over the digital network actually succeeded because they decentralized society. But the irony is that now that they perform a great societal function, they have become monopolies. And there needs to be an approach that for the platforms of the future, because a lot more uh, of the innovation is going to happen over distributed platforms, whether it's things like universal health records and health technologies and businesses. As the platforms of the future evolve, we do not want to repeat the same mistake, that is having a few big giants control the lives of millions of people. So let me give you an example of how we can do it. We have a very live example here. The email, everyone uses it. This is the Gmail client. Most of you probably have a Gmail service. But the email was based on an open protocol, which means tomorrow, if Gmail tries to charge you for your emails and Gmail increases the cost a lot, you would basically switch to another provider, because Gmail cannot lock you in, because it's based on the open email protocol. Gmail is only one client that allows that protocol to function. And we should be very grateful to the early the visionaries of the internet who thought about making email as a protocol and not as a company which would then monopolize the whole communication network of the world. But that has happened with things like social media and even things like concepts like identity. Today, if I want to have the most convenient way to access the web, I am drowned in a world where I need to have so many different logins and passwords. So I would use the sign in with Google, and one company is basically monopolizing this identity. So we are going to, throughout this course and throughout this program, we are going to explore how different decentralized alternatives are being emerged. For instance, things like decentralized identifiers and even self-sovereign identities that is allowing us to take ownership of our identity without needing to depend on one company or even one government, because we are moving towards a highly globalized world where there is going to be a lot of movement across jurisdictions, and being dependent on public issues or government issued identities is also a big problem there, because there is immense lack of interoperability at a global scale. So when we talk about the digital platforms of the future, the decentralized platforms, we are talking about all these layers, and all of this will be covered in this course. At the top level is the governance. Can we create decentralized autonomous organizations? Then after that is about our data and content. Can we have distributed storage of data so that it is not monopolized by one company? There are two approaches to do that. One is a distributed data storage. One example is the IPFS, that is Interplanetary File System, which means your data could be stored across multiple places without giving the opportunity for the data keeper to have monopoly over it. And the other aspect is peer-to-peer protocols, which is that instead of depending on a centralized party for all communications to take place, can we directly connect peer-to-peer? For instance, right now my video is being transmitted right over to your computer, but it has to go to the Zoom server, and the Zoom server, if they want, they can process it, they can access it, and we need to depend on them. But you could have technologies, and they are emerging, that we could directly establish protocol level connections from one computer to the another, and our videos could move directly. And for instance, Impervious Browser is an example of a startup working at that area. We'll cover that in our course. Then the big area is assets. Assets are one of the aspects which really require decentralization, because today, if you want to store your assets, whether it's stocks or money, you need to rely on banks and companies and organizations And then identity, we already spoke about that. And last thing is contracts. Today, if you want to execute contracts, you need to trust the other person. And if the other person doesn't fulfill, then you need to trust the legal system, and then you need to trust the bureaucracy. But a lot of contracts, especially financial contracts, can be automated, can be decentralized, or even if not decentralized, can be stored in a peer-to-peer fashion and can be self-executable, which means you can trust the smart contract without needing to go to the legal system. So these are the various levels of decentralization that will be covered in this course. And what is interesting is that when we are living in a centralized world, we often do not see the problems, like the fish that is in the water does not realize what water is. For the fish, the water is something that is already existing for us. The air we breathe. I'll give you this example. My parents, they live in New Delhi, India. It's one of the most polluted cities in the world. Every time I go there and I tell them that there is a lot of pollution, and they say, "Oh, but we are not sensing it. We're not smelling it because we're just used to it." But it still harms them. So the centralized systems that we have today have risks. There's the problem of monopolization of the big tech. There's this issue of, for one example, what happened in Cyprus when the banking system failed, when the banks failed, the depositors lost their money, and that was in a regulated European system. Even their depositors lost their money in a bank, and it's been happening all over the world. We know even in the crypto industry, there are centralized structures which you need to trust to keep your funds. For example, for those of you who are aware, the whole story of FTX and how the FTX played with users' funds, because it was a centralized system. But the beauty of blockchain technology and decentralized technology is that you don't need to trust them. You don't need to keep your money with these centralized systems. So I'm going to be quickly covering some of the other aspects or problems of centralized systems. Um, One of them is social media. Social media is centralized, but the problem is the social media is very much prone to censorship. We have had loads of examples where, of course, there are these so-called naughty countries and with bad governments who censor us. But whichever country you live in, your government is always telling you that you are the good guys and the other guys are the bad guys. But censorship is everywhere. There's no country that remains immune to censorship. There is political censorship. We know when Twitter was on one side, it would censor right-leaning statements, and now since Elon Musk bought it, it's moved to the other side. Do we want to be dependent on social media networks that are prone to control by political influence? This video below is a statement that YouTube has now started censoring any even health-related information, especially alternative health-related information, if it goes against the mainstream. But if you keep censoring, then how can you get alternate points of view? There is again the problem of monopolization. If we want things like health records for our future to be dependent on certain companies, how can we create a system that will be more beneficial to society, that will not be prone to corporate agendas? And that is why we need decentralized systems where the data itself and the content itself is not stored there. There are many innovations. We'll explore them. One of them is Nostr, that is an open protocol that allows you to create social media like Twitter, like Facebook, like other networks, but they are just the front end, and the data continues to be remaining in a distributed manner. And then why do we need decentralized assets? So when we talk about decentralized assets is anything representing value. One example of an asset is money, which is what we all use. But then there is stocks, there is bonds, there is ownership deeds and titles, there can be digital art, there can be intellectual property that can be represented as an asset. Now the common thing of all of these aspects is all these assets you can never keep with yourself. You can never, only way you can keep money with yourself is if you are holding bags of cash in your bed, but you still need some entity or company to trust them. And you can say, well, our governments will control them and manage them, and so we don't need decentralized systems. But we have seen what happens, and loads of examples, which I don't have time to cover all of them, but that's what the class is all about. Um, so we can create fungible tokens and non-fungible tokens. Fungible token is a token that is exchangeable, like money, and non-fungible token like a land record or a property. That's commonly known as NFT. So both these can be created in the blockchain, and we can create the advantage of creating them on the blockchain is that you can have full transparency, you can have self-custody. When you want to deal with them, for instance, if you want to buy and sell them, you don't need to have the bureaucracy that centralized systems involve. You can have quick settlements, you can have auditability, you can have infinite divisibility. It depends on what you can have programmability, and most of all, you can have automation, because the moment you move all of these assets onto the blockchain, you are now living in the 21st century, and you can now automate everything, whether it's through smart contracts, you can connect them with AI, and that's the beauty why we need decentralized assets. But even within the assets, so like now as we are double clicking and going down the rabbit hole, you will see that we go further deeper in. Why do we need decentralized money? Because if we have not yet realized, fiat money system is broken. The most out of all of these 180 countries in the world, most of the countries that we know have, in fact, a large number of countries have already had bouts of hyperinflation where their governments have continued to print money because to cover their costs. These are just some of the countries which have seen hyperinflation or very high levels of inflation, and there is no way that people can escape. Today, the only escape route for people is somehow to get access to the US dollar, which also has been inflating. There is no common international currency for international trade. And as the trust in international systems is breaking down, we are getting more and more fragmented. But we all know the future. If the future of the earth is positive, it has got to be in a unified world. We cannot have a broken world. So we need a common international currency that is not controlled and monopolized by one country. And that's where, when as US dollar system breaks down, what else is going to come to replace it? We are going to ask this question. Then as countries go through bouts of hyperinflation and that people try to get their savings and assets out, we are very familiar with how lots of capital controls are deployed. Censorships have been deployed. Many times political opponents' bank accounts are frozen because it's very easy for governments to do that. Sanctions have been applied. You might even say that you can justify the sanctions on a country. But I know personally people, for instance, my wife itself is from Iran, and I know how their citizens are suffering because the sanctions is on the government, but every single Iranian doesn't have access to simple things like moving their money, opening a bank account, even to go to Binance and opening a bank account and buying a crypto. They cannot do that because of sanctions. And so we know what the problems of decentralized money is. Uh, this is just a chart to show you that when we had the gold standard, because this is something we're going to cover in the class, we had this gold standard from 1815 to 1910, and we had very low levels of inflation. And since we have moved to the fiat standard, that's typically from 1973, we have seen massive inflation in the United Kingdom. And this chart is from the Bank of England. And means that one generation ago, it was much, much easier for our parents or our grandparents to buy a house, buy property, collect assets, and it's getting harder and harder for the young people. And no wonder that they are extremely agitated with this situation. So we are going to explore that Bitcoin, can it provide an alternate financial system? Can it be the basis of a alternate financial system? We don't have the time to explore all the attributes of it, but this is what the first session of our course will be, because Bitcoin has certain attributes which all economists will agree that sound money should have. Firstly, it's very portable, so portability. It is global in nature. It has accessibility. Anyone can go create an account, create a wallet, get the Bitcoin. It has scarcity. That means it's hard coded to have a fixed maximum supply on Bitcoin itself. It has the verifiability. That means it's on a public ledger. Nobody can create secretly extra Bitcoins and basically rob you of your purchasing power. You can check on the public ledger how many Bitcoins are issued and who owns whom. You can track every transaction. You can have durability. Durability is a very important aspect of sound money, because you have had 100% uptime. Sorry, it's since 2008, not since 2018. I'll need to correct that slide. But ever since Bitcoin was launched, everyone has accessibility. You cannot have one country censoring another. So it's a money for the people, because it doesn't discriminate based on race, nationality. Everyone has access to it. It has easy transferability, because it's again being built on layers, just like the internet was built. So you have the base layer, that's for final settlements, that's a slow transaction, and then you have upper layers such as Lightning Network, that is for instant payment settlements, and then you have this high degree of divisibility. So there are some attributes of Bitcoin, and as we question that there is a breakdown in the global fiat monetary system, can Bitcoin emerge? This is a question that we are going to explore. Now, there's often when they explore different currencies, they say, why Bitcoin? Why not another coin? Why not Ethereum? Why not other crypto tokens? Anyone can create any token. And this is another aspect of Bitcoin that we're going to explore. That firstly, there is an aspect that when you have so many metals, precious metals, but gold is what, by consensus, not by fiat, not by the law of a government, gold was accepted in our system to be the store of value that everyone in the world could exchange with, and this was all the way till 19th century. Um, so Bitcoin emerged as the first token, and it had an ethical launch, means there was not one team that created it and kept it for itself. It was an open, it's based on the proof of work mining protocol. So initially, anyone in the world could mine it, which means it was far more decentralized. Even it's the creator, what is Satoshi Nakamoto, who nobody knows who he is. He never mined and kept it for himself. He was encouraging everyone to mine so that it can be distributed. And when it gained a sufficient critical mass, he had a wallet, which he was the initial one mining it. He quietly left, and that wallet has never moved since the beginning. Over the last 13, 14 years, it's never been moved. So most likely he's probably dead. So which means there is this ethical launch and ethical distribution, which means that while other tokens could represent values associated to companies, could represent stocks, but Bitcoin has this unique attribute that it's secured, unchanging. It doesn't have a company leader. It's very decentralized, and this is why we believe that it can have a good chance. However, to be a global source of value exchange of value, but there are risks which we will be explored. Now, the next aspect of decentralization is smart contracts. Why do we need smart contracts? Now, as we can move assets and value on the blockchain, we can automate terms and conditions when certain exchanges have to take place. So one example of a smart contract is the Aave protocol, which is basically, you can think of it as a code in the cloud, but people can go to the protocol, they can lend their money, and borrowers can go and put a collateral there, borrow money and pay the interest, and the interest gets paid back to the lenders. And this is basically an example of a peer-to-peer lending, fully being managed and run by a code in the cloud, in the blockchain basically. And this Aave is one example of a very successful lending platform. Similarly, there are decentralized exchanges which allow for different assets to be exchanged by participants without needing a company, without needing an organization, without needing a CEO. Once the code is developed by an open source, decentralized autonomous organization, these codes remain there, and they're charges, their terms and conditions, everything is very clear because everything is coded into the code itself. So it's fully transparent. So we're going to explore, what does decentralized smart contracts mean, where to automate and digitize terms and conditions, automate financial operations, remove third parties, automate the trust. And because while these are early experiments, these are decentralized smart contracts could become the foundation for a lot of exchange in the world. We're talking about technologies that will shape the exchange of value over the next decades, if not the next centuries. Um, Lastly, we will talk about this whole concept of a DAO, because we are quite familiar with the concept of flat organization, but a DAO is an organization where collaborators come together. They have their own ways of exchanging value. They have their own voting mechanisms to create new code, create new software, and they have a mechanism to incentivize and pay to the contributors. They can even vote on who will get how much salary, and there is a community doing it. This is very, very interesting, because now this is no longer about having just an open source software where everyone contributes. So most of these blockchain technologies have been created by DAOs, but DAOs could be used for other kinds of inclusive organizations. They may not be a substitute for all companies, but for especially some companies which require a global approach, which have a social purpose, for instance, decentralized digital platforms, these could include bring more globalization, more innovation, ability for trying different things and allowing the concepts of competition and collaboration, both allowing for the improvements to take place. It can have a more of an ecosystem approach. And the best part is that since it's not owned by one board, it's not owned by a group or a company. Its motive is more on value creation rather than profit motive itself. It can have less compliance costs. It can also benefit from the jurisdictional arbitrage. Means the very fact that the DAO is global means sometimes for some things we need experiments to launch and succeed before the governments come in to regulate them, because we have the risk of overregulation, and DAOs can provide such an opportunity. So this has been my quick attempt to give you an overview of what all we are talking about decentralization. It's a very complex concept, but we hope that you find this interesting enough to join and participate in this journey, in this experience, where you will not only get to know about what are these latest innovations in these decentralized technologies, but will also have a hands-on experience on things like working with smart contracts, using assets, using decentralized wallets, going to centralized exchanges, and getting a hands-on experience. And at the same time, there will be a lot of discussion. There will be a lot of critical thinking. We encourage different points of views, because some of these disruptive models, there is not only one person who has all the knowledge. So we encourage this engagement and discussion. So thank you for joining with us. And now I am open to all kinds of questions from you.
Thanks a lot, Anish. It was a great talk. You know, I learned some things which I was not thinking about. Thanks a lot. Okay, everyone. Hope you have enjoyed. Let's have some questions if you have questions directly to Anish, and the course if you have questions too.
Well, if no one wants to go first, whenever I may.
Please
go ahead.
Thank you, Anish, for your talk. Well, I actually have a couple of questions, but the first one, and obviously this is just a sneak preview of the program, but are you going to debate how governance and DAOs might be introduced to traditional companies?
This is an approach that definitely will be looking forward. And my personal opinion is that it's most suitable for digital platforms. So
Okay.
the kind of activities that the big digital platforms and big tech does, these are
Mhm.
the ideas, especially things like social media and video and content and news and distributed news. These are items where DAOs could actually play a very big role. However, it wouldn't be that all companies would make sense. For instance, I don't think yet manufacturing companies it yet makes sense. But I think more and more as we move into highly intellectual property
Mhm.
companies, uh, it could be that they might get decentralized. Even things like we've been talking about open source medicine or open source drugs, where
Yeah.
communities want to come together and create something for humanity and share from that rather than simply monopolize drugs. This could be another interesting area where we could explore a decentralized or a DAO based approach.
No, most definitely. The DAO is actually something quite interesting, and this is just, well, I'm just chatting, but at a matter of fact, when we're talking about governance, the role that syndicates, etc., have in traditional companies, and how can this be applied? But something else that I wanted to ask, well, just two more things. Sorry, I don't want to take all the time and with so many people here in the room. It's the bring of tokenization to real world assets, as for example, as gold is already tokenized, and if you're going to approach that in the program, and also, well, it's pretty much about decentralization, but at the same time, when you went a little bit into economics, you don't go into DeFi.
We have a full session on DeFi. But if you will remember, I spoke about decentralized smart contracts and I gave the
Mhm.
example of the lending platform Aave, which is an example of DeFi itself. And even decentralized exchanges are examples of DeFi. Uh, to answer your question, yeah, DeFi is going to be fully covered. And what was your other question? Sorry, just if you can
But
remind me.
it was a bit about tokenization, but one other
Yeah.
thing, if we're going into that matter, it's also just out of interest. The approach on CBDCs to replace traditional fiat. Well, in a certain way, they won't replace it in a matter of what you talked about. But please, sorry.
We will cover that, but let me share some thoughts on this. So, firstly, about tokenization.
Mhm.
So you're right, gold has been tokenized, but I would argue that that is one of the reasons why gold's prices have not really moved too much over the last decade since it got tokenized, because it got tokenized in a very centralized way. The way gold got tokenized is that there are all kinds of organizations that can issue claims on gold, and that
Mhm.
often does not reflect the actual real quantity of gold that exists in the world. Because as with any kind of financial product or system, we know that when most people, when they want to invest in gold and buy gold based or gold backed tokens, they will not go and claim their gold back, and which is what allows many entities and institutions to create a lot of fake gold or gold claims,
Mhm.
and then that allows the price to be controlled, and which is actually the beauty of blockchain based tokens, because everyone can have ask for self custody, means you
Mhm.
cannot have or create fake claims on any kind of asset, whether it's a stock. Even in the case of stocks, you have a lot more regulated environment, but even stock brokerages, the settlement time is usually 2 or 3 days, and there have been many systems around the world where more claims to stocks have been sold than the
Mhm.
actual stock issuance. There has been all kinds of shady business, which is why auditing is the only way. But we know that's a big problem, and that's where blockchain brings in that auditability, because when you issue a certain number of tokens, everyone can see on the blockchain how many tokens are there. So if the token represents, say, a fractionized real estate, and you say that I'm issuing so many tokens of this real estate. If you have this token, you have this fractional ownership to this real estate. You can firstly have self-custody. You can have global, you can have it moved around globally. So this is why Bitcoin is also very interesting, because compared to gold, Bitcoin, because it can allow for self-custody at the base layer, and also in the Lightning Network, which is a fast way to move Bitcoins around, you still have it being connected to the locked assets on the base layer. So you cannot have claims on the even on the Lightning Network on Bitcoins which do not exist on the base layer. So now we have a technology that everyone can take self-custody of, and even if they are not taking self-custody of, if they are trusting a company to hold their assets, for instance, Bitcoin, they have the option to ask for their custody back whenever they want. And this was the reason why the FTX as an exchange collapsed so quickly, because when there was a scare, people went and asked for their Bitcoins and asked for their cryptocurrencies back. And then FTX didn't have, because the numbers they were showing on the screen is just a number that is hardwired onto a database that was not collaborating to the assets on the blockchain. So
but that
as
was an
these systems
exchange.
evolve,
And sorry, Anish, but what centralized exchange can we actually say that is backed by anything? We're having the same problem with we're just a near collapse with Binance. But look, I'm sorry. I don't want to take anyone more time, so I'll stop. But sorry.
No, it's really good that you are asking these questions. But I'll move on to your next question about CBDCs. So CBDCs are quite the opposite of blockchain-based tokens, because firstly, they don't need a blockchain. Because the very fact that you have an issuer, which is the central bank can easily run it on their centralized database. I do not see the need for any blockchain, which will just slow it down. The CBDC brings some unique value over here. One of the factors that you can, because the way our whole financial system is organized is that we deal with claims on commercial banks, and account holders never hold assets directly with the central bank. It could put a lot of challenge to the commercial banks if you had the chance to move your assets from the account of the commercial bank to the central bank, which is why I am quite skeptical of the success of CBDC for the end user. But I see its value for international trade, because when countries need to settle accounts, and if you can have something like a CBDC and that settlement could be moved across, I can see some value there. But this is an aspect that I'll give a narrative and my own reasoning in terms of what I see CBDC is, and my own understanding on it during the lectures.
And
Thank you
Pedro,
very much,
I
Anish.
can add, Pedro, I can add that one of the use cases that we are sharing on the program is related to CBDC, and I'm sharing myself.
Okay, thank you very much, Ricardo. Well, thank you both.
Thanks a lot. More questions?
Yes, Qatar here.
Hi, Qatar.
How are you? So I'm interested along similar lines in terms of the latest European regulation that was issued on crypto in April. Do you have any immediate views on how it has impacted, what kind of impact it had on the ecosystem in the last few months, and where do you see it going?
Yeah,
maybe I can.
Yeah, probably.
Yes,
yeah, probably.
maybe.
Ines,
Maybe I
you
can
are the
answer
expert on legal.
this
in the
question,
regulatory.
since I'm a lawyer. So I believe you are talking about MiCA, the Market in Crypto Asset Regulation. So it has been published in the official journal of the European Union, but most of its clauses will only come into force next year, at like the end of next year. So right now, the impact that at least I have seen with Web3 companies that are in Europe, currently in Europe, some of them have thought of moving out of Europe, because they are not a bit scared, but they fear that this transition period will not help them, but I mean, it's their own specific cases. Some companies that were thinking of launching some tokens or doing some other activities. Other companies are quite happy and they're moving here to Europe because finally there's clear regulation in this space. And obviously, MiCA is the most comprehensive regulation in the world right now. So, my personal view on this, and I will teach a class just on the international regulatory framework on our course. My view is that other countries and other regions will follow MiCA and will also start to regulate in the same topics. So right now we have not seen so much impact yet since it's not in force yet. Obviously, some companies are already planning their next moves according to this. Some companies are also trying to maybe put on hold their license procedures, because with MiCA, when a crypto asset service provider gets a license in one of the European countries, they don't need to get another license in another country, whereas before you'd see Binance, for example, pursuing a license here in Portugal, another one in Germany. They also had one in Italy. So right now, some companies have also put on hold their license procedures because they feel it's not necessary when MiCA comes into force. I hope I helped
Yes,
clear some of your
absolutely.
doubts.
And do you see a trend in terms of where the crypto companies are heading at the moment? Is it trending towards Europe or towards Hong Kong,
No.
away
So
from?
I mean, this specific cases that I'm thinking about were companies that were not even here in Portugal. Some of them were in Estonia, and they are looking maybe to go to like Asia, like Singapore, or America is not really a place where companies are currently moving because it's very messy right now in terms of regulation in America. So, no, I believe that most companies will stay in Europe. Some of them there are in America are moving here, and some others that where MiCA does is not good for them because it might not be such a good regulation for some very specific companies. They're looking towards other jurisdictions.
That's great. I hope some of them move here to Portugal.
Yes, I also hope so. But in Portugal is a bit harder just because of the corporate tax, which is not very favorable. So it's more for a tax reason and not so much on for a regulation point of view, I believe. I mean, this is just my view.
Thank you very much.
And I'm believing, at the end of the day, everything is related to AML when we are looking to the other side. And for AML, most of them are applying the regulation in full. Europe, sure, and other jurisdictions the same.
Thank you.
More questions?
I do have a question. I'm sorry, I'm in my car because I just left work, so I was watching while working at the end of the day. But this is related especially with the social media part. Professor Anish talked about how there's a lot of censorship on the internet, especially on social media. But I do ask, how can we make sure that with no censorship, with the open source and the open and the decentralized social media, it will be safe? Because we do know that the censorship is there for a of course, it's there, and it might not be good when it comes to the free world. But in a way, we are talking that a lot of kids do use the internet, and the censorship is there for them as well. So how can we know that everything that will be displayed is safe for the community? Does that make? I don't know if I'm making myself understandable, but this is my very, very hard question when it comes to decentralized internet as a big thing.
Good question, Leonor. So there are lots of issues with censorship, especially when it comes to things like politics and political aspects of it. But yeah, there are also, as you mentioned, areas where certain kinds of content needs to be controlled. Now, the beauty of a DAO or a DAO-based system is that you do not entrust a government or a bureaucrat or a bureaucracy. If you can see the recently passed laws by EU is basically a bureaucracy will decide what is fake news, what is hate speech. Hate speech, we can have a common agreement on that, but fake news or bad advice, health related advice that is not from the official lines, there are we will have a more deeper discussion on this. But I think the solution here is community, getting the community involved and having very clear community guidelines, and this can be possible within a DAO based system. There is another approach to it, is that we can create, and that's what Nostr aims to create. Or Nostr creates the ability for different computer networks to share messages at a protocol level. Means it's not possible to have any kind of censorship at the protocol level. But most people will not go into the protocol to read messages, like we don't go into our computer and look at the HTML code on to browse and see what the website is. We use a browser. So there's a front end, and the front end will eventually, the most popular front ends will be the best ones, and they will be the ones that will be manned by a community. It'll have community guideline policy. It will be based on topics and areas that I want to remove and filter off or not see. But what might be a topic or theme that I'm not interested, maybe someone else is interested in. So I would say the solution is on two fronts. The first, yeah, of course, hate speech, things like create hatred in community. It's very easy to be objective there, because we can all have a community standard on that. Fake news, this is something that's very political, because if some news or opinion does not fall into the perspective of your side or your government or your politics, then that is fake news. So something like fake news has to be ultimately giving more freedom to individuals, which means that if you have a platform and the platform as a whole believes through their own community guidance policies that this particular thing should not be shown, then it can be hidden. But you can move to another platform. It may be a platform that's not so popular, it may be clunky. You can do that. But another big advantage that this kind of a protocol employs is that, suppose you are a creator, and you are on Twitter, you are on YouTube, and YouTube or Twitter decided that they want to close your account because they don't agree with your policies, or because you are. There are many people which, for very legitimate reasons, YouTube or Twitter would not agree with their policies. They can, in an open protocol ecosystem, they can basically take their followers. They can go to another platform and tell their followers, if you want to follow me, don't use this client, go to this other client, and you will still be able to access me. But this client, based on their community policies, I cannot I'm not visible here. So this is one approach to it. Another approach that is very interesting with these decentralized social media platforms is the ability to channel small amounts of Bitcoin-based money. So you can have ways of sending small amounts of money to the content creator, which means that if there is a certain amount of content that's receiving money, even if it's at a micro Satoshi, which is very small fractions of pennies, but that can be one of the metrics that can be used to see that there might be a lot of interest in this area or in this topic, and that can be used not to block hate speech, but things like spam and things like content that is clearly a scam. so the use of micropayments, it's a very big topic, that how clever ways can be designed where you are basically using the wisdom of crowds to identify content types and content quality. So I didn't have one answer for you, but I have just some approaches that could work.
Any more questions? Otherwise, I believe it's we are after our time. We don't want you to stick around after the time. I don't know if you have any more questions. Otherwise, Anish, can you close?
Sure. So firstly, we are very excited about this course. That's what we want to pass through this masterclass, and we are very excited about this topic. So even if you don't decide to join the course, you can always join our Telegram group. We can stay in touch. We can continue chatting. But my invitation to you is that this course would give you an experience which is something that you will take back, and it's one of the courses which I feel, not because I want to sell this course, but because I am an academic, and it's one of the topics that really gets you to be introspective and think about the future of our society, because we're not talking about just technologies. We are going to talk about what are its implications will have on the society, on the economy, on the politics. And that's why we have taken this course. We know it's not a course that's very easy for people to understand. It's not one of the course for the masses. It's the course for a very specific group of people who are ready to think and introspect and debate and discuss. So with that, I would just close today's day, and thank you very much for coming here and listening to us.
Thank you, everyone. We are sharing information on the Telegram group, and we are stick around. And please put all your questions you have on our Telegram, and we are seeing each other.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.